Matt Robeson, Beyond Politics. And today, what happens to politics, to democracy, as AI gets ever more deeply embedded in everything we do? In 2024, Dr. Jeffrey E. Hinton won the Nobel Prize in Physics for helping to develop artificial intelligence. But the award was tinged with irony, because just a year earlier, Dr. Hinton quit his job at Google, where he had worked for more than a decade, and become one of the most respected voices in artificial intelligence, in order to be able to speak out freely about the risks that AI poses. He said that a part of him now regrets his life's work, and that the biggest danger that AI poses is not some Skynet scenario from the Terminator, like intelligent machines deciding that humanity is a threat and unleashing nuclear Armageddon. It's much subtler and more insidious. Dr. Hinton's number one concern is that increasingly, artificial intelligence will flood us with false and distorted information, making it harder and harder to understand reality. In his words, he fears that the average person will not be able to know what is true anymore. Let me bring in another related piece. In a bizarre coincidence, right after this Nobel Prize was awarded, Oxford announced that its word of the year was brain rot. Brain rot is defined as intellectual deterioration from consuming online drivel. So put it together. And you've got a man described as the father of artificial intelligence leaving the field and worrying about what he's unleashed on the world because of AI's effects on the way we process basic information. And at the same time, you've got the dictionary declaring that the word that best sums up 2024 is the exact same concept: the melting down of our brains from being fed so much material mediated by and generated by machines. So, why is all of this worth knowing? Because democracy is like a car where the drivers, so why is all of this worth knowing? Because democracy is like a car and we're the drivers, and everything around us is getting darker and foggier. Already, one of the big challenges of our time is that people are having a harder and harder time taking in useful information about the world. They risk brain rot, or they get so fed up that they tune out. I just wrote in Newsweek about this, detailing new data from the polling firm Change Research, showing why people are having such a hard time tuning into the news, especially news about politics. They find it to be a painful chore. They're put off by all of the misinformation, which is a polite way of talking about the lying and distortions pushed at us from partisan media institutions or our own president. They're put off by all of the clickbait sensationalism. And now we're increasingly in danger that what people are going to have to rely on is information generated by machines in response to algorithms suggesting what it is that people want to hear. The end result is really dangerous. If you're living in a democracy where our ability to take information about the world in and make decisions based on that information, where that's the basis of our entire society, we're in trouble. The dictionary definition of politics is the activities associated with governance, especially the debate or conflict among individuals or parties having or hoping to achieve power. But what if that debate is happening between machines and the entire way we make decisions involves less and less human thought and exchange of ideas? That's why it really caught my eye when my friend Michael Cohen, the author of the book Modern Political Campaigns, announced that he was putting out a second edition with a whole new chapter on how artificial intelligence is affecting political campaigns. And to be clear, when Michael is talking about political campaigns, he really means politics in general, the practice of politics, the way it's invaded all kinds of realms of life, and the way that AI, in turn, has invaded the realm of politics. So my guest today is Michael Cohen, not the one you're thinking of, the Trump guy, the other one, this PhD professor. Michael Cohen, and our topic is how machines are changing our politics and what the road ahead looks like. So tell me, why did your book need a second edition? What's changed?
The book needed a second edition for two reasons. Number one, every 4 years, that seems to be some kind of major advance in politics from a technology standpoint, or some kind of structural change where we really need to take another look and see what our underlying assumptions were and see if they hold up. And I did not know going into this that it was going to be artificial intelligence, specifically generative AI, because artificial intelligence has just been around for many years in various different ways. I like to talk about that in terms of proto AI and generative AI, because generative AI really is how everyone thinks about AI right now. But proto AI are things like modeling, are things like sort of data analysis, like straight up regression models, like a lot of things that sort of you take information and then it transforms it into something else. And usually what that did was for politics is it gave campaigns tools to make better decisions, right? We are now in an era which is completely different from where we were 4 years ago, because we now are not just generating ideas and things and threads to follow on how to go and activate our core supporters or persuade people who are persuadable. We're now at the point where we're creating the content, where you are prompting the chatbot and it is spitting back to you all kinds of new content that you can then edit and use. And so the big shift here, more than anything else, is number one, speed, because the book is how professionalism, technology, and speed revolutionize elections from our political campaigns. It's faster right now to go ahead and come up with a draft of something that you would want to put on the internet or have your candidate say or whatever. Um, and it is elevating some of the sort of junior people on teams in terms of professionalism, which is it's giving them a tool that they didn't have before. Think about like how we used to work on campaigns way back in the day. We had typewriters, right? Think about the shift from typewriters to computers and having lists printed out to having all of a sudden now we have the list of who we're going to knock on doors on our phones. And it's really been a revolution because so instead of like campaigns looking at how we're going to create all this content for all of these platforms that we're now affiliated with, we now have a tool that could help us create some of that content. And the big shift, really more than anything else, is the first time in campaign history that I can come up with through any type of technological advance from radio all the way to generative AI, is that everybody got the technology at the exact same time at an extremely low price point, which meant that not only are your best campaigns, your Senate, governor, presidentials, are able to use this technology, it's dog catcher, it's county commission, it's sheriff. Like they're all able to use it. Everybody has these tools at the same time. And on top of that, everybody's trying to figure out how to use them at the same time.
Right, 2000, George W. Bush campaign pioneers certain types of big data construction, putting together this data set with that data set to figure out groups of voters to target. They're sort of beta testing
Micro-targeting,
it.
right,
Everyone else comes along with micro-targeting.
right.
2004, Howard Dean figures out how to leverage meetups to do better grassroots organizing.
And to
Obama,
raise money, and to raise money. He's
and to
basically the
raise
first
money.
candidate to ever raise money online. And he's way ahead of everybody else. And then everybody catches up.
And everybody
Exactly.
catches up. Barack Obama, beta testing of messaging, a lot of A/B testing, a lot of email and text message outreach, different technological platforms, as well as turning the crank even further on micro targeting. So, what you're saying is that those waves where there's early movers and they may get an early mover advantage, and then there's followers and they adopt the innovations and then they become widespread. I'm hearing another thread here. It seems to me that what you're talking about in the book is modern political campaigns. And what you mean is political campaigns, the way we think about them. It's you're hiring a campaign manager, you're running for a specific office. But there's really two things here that suggest to me that what you're really describing is even broader. First of all, there's been a lot of discussion for decades now about the permanent campaign. Is it true that everything that you're describing in this book also attaches to the permanent campaign, the ongoing communication and the ongoing politics that we're living throughout government administrations, throughout the 24-hour news cycle?
Absolutely. It's actually where the first book lands. It lands on a chapter called The Permanent Campaign. It was actually the working title of the first book, which I took a long time to write, was called The New Permanent Campaign. And so I ended up there because I really felt like people need to understand what the nuts and bolts were before they got to the final concept. But you're absolutely right. These campaigns never stop running. Kamala HQ is now back online. President Trump's campaign has not stopped either. They're continuously raising money because they're going to be supporting other candidates and supporting his nascent, crazy challenge to go run for a third term. So there's a lot of reasons why these campaigns never stop. The media never stops. And so if you are not continuously putting yourself in the mindset that you have to continuously run, This whole business that you got into is not just governing, but it's also about campaigning continuously.
And people once in elective office, or even we don't want to necessarily confine this to elective office. People who are in appointed office, people who are in positions of power, not just in government, are adopting the practices that you're
Yes.
outlining here in political campaigns. I'm air quoting here for people who are listening on audio. And so the permanent campaign attaches to many spheres of modern life. And what you're outlining here is that all of them are adopting these
Yes.
technological shortcuts
Yes.
to work their way into our brains. If politics is the communal act of considering competing approaches, competing points of view, and working through them and debating them and deciding which
Yeah.
direction to go, we are constantly living through the modern political campaign.
We are, right? And we're living through it in between. And it's not just the candidates, it is the agencies, it is interest groups, it's trade associations, it's unions. They're all literally campaigning all the time because they're trying to push for legislation, they're trying to stop things from happening, particularly what's going on with Doge right now. There are members of Congress who are running mini campaigns to try and influence what's going on with Doge, one way or the other. And this is the way that they are operating right now. This is basically the operating system for for political life right now is the permanent campaign. And so when you look at it, I should really write that down for the third edition. No,
That I
but yeah,
listen, this is what we come
anyway,
here to do is
are
to
we
workshop
workshopping
smart
here?
ideas.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
we're workshopping. Yeah,
Trademark it,
but
trademark it
yeah,
quickly.
all of this technology that's being used in campaigns is also being used everywhere else. And so it's not just sort of germane to, and I'll hold up the cover, modern political campaigns. It's for office, but it really is much more related to all the other things that are going on in the ether. And to be honest, even the media themselves are running campaigns as they're going on right now because they're fighting for access as collectively as well as individually. So a lot of this is really sort of becoming mainstream.
Alert viewers and listeners will have noticed that 5 minutes ago I said there were two things I wanted to run by you. And I have the second one. You said a few minutes ago that you define AI more broadly than people generally think of it. We use AI these days as shorthand for generative AI, a
Right.
piece of software that can come up with what seems to be original human thought. Is not, it's actually crowdsourced from previous human thought, but whatever.
Exactly.
It's good at synthesis. And you're suggesting, look, if we think about AI more, is any computer machine generated piece of intelligence or decision making made for us. And that's what really ropes into me the algorithm, meaning social media algorithms, social media mediated interactions between humans. You've got generative AI, which is suggesting here are the thoughts that you should express. But you've also got algorithmic AI on Meta, on Twitter, saying you should look at this. Now look
Yeah,
at
but
this.
Matt, what they're doing is they're not generating the content, but they're generating the audience.
Yes.
Okay. They're generating the audience for whatever you're posting. Because what they're doing is they're connecting the dots between what you're posting and the kinds of things that you're posting and the other people who might be interested in it. And then they're feeding those people everything that is possibly close to that. Because what they're trying to do is they're trying to get you to stay. They're trying to get your eyeballs on the screen, on their app or on their platform. And the way to do that is to algorithmically design audiences for every single user.
And on the other end of it, the thing that I think is most insidious and most important to understand is that I am what is emetically described in the social media world as a creator. Oh gosh, I'm a creator. And what do I create? Content.
Condolences.
This is
I know.
so disgusting. But anyway, I'm a creator who creates content.
You're more than that, Matt.
Oh, thanks. Yes. I'm not just a
You're
drone, I'm a
you're a
man.
person. You're a person. I'm a man. Flesh
they,
and blood.
they, and so even if I'm not using ChatGPT to
Right.
write my copy, which I never do, I don't do that.
Good
I am
call.
nonetheless, anytime I create something for YouTube, I'm getting a nudge in the direction of you should say things this way. This is what your thumbnail should look like. This is what your headline should look like. I could use a tool that suggests a headline for you and gives you a score. And well, that's not exactly optimized. We can optimize this for you. Put in this word, put in this concept. Right. And what does it tend toward? Before you know it, your thought has kind of gotten massaged by the algorithm to become the thought that the algorithm says you should be creating. And what does it tend toward? A certain type of combative, pugilistic, very partisan gray goo or red goo or blue goo. And that's what you see pervading most of our political discourse.
Yes, and they've got it backwards. The creative process starts with creative thought. It doesn't start with the end game of creating audience. Okay. So generally, if you put stuff out that's good, eventually it finds an audience. And if it doesn't, well, then fine. Then you try something different, right? And what they're trying to do is give you some kind of weird shortcut to what the audience is right now, as opposed to what the audience will be in 6 months. For example, let's say you went ahead and changed the show and we started screaming at each other for the next 20 minutes, right? Right? And all of a sudden you get 25% more people listening to the podcast now, right? And you say to yourself, man, I guess I got to scream at people for a living. And so like, all right, fine. So I scream at people for 6 months. But on month 7, all of a sudden people are exhausted by all of this and they are then going to other things. So it takes the algorithm a little while to catch up to realize that you're a screamer. You really should have been talking the whole time. And you are never going to be on the front end of that curve or be true to yourself because you're not a screaming guy. So it really optimizes for what's happening now, not what's going to happen soon, right? It's what we do with polling, right? Like we understand what's happening right now. We can't really predict what's going to happen next. People usually look at this stuff and say, that's going to tell me how I'm going to win. No, it's if the election were held today. All it's really optimizing is for what's going on right now, not what's going to happen next.
In looking at the new edition of the book, was there a story, was there something you found in your research that really stood out to you as this is emblematic of kind of where things are going, where things are evolving?
Yeah, I think there are 2 stories. The first story is with a consultant who generally focuses on statewide politics or local races. And so I said to him, I'm like, how are you using this stuff? And he said to me, what's been really great is I've been using it to help me do more proposals than I would normally do. You have to propose to candidates that you'd want to work with them and usually put together a deep proposal that has certain aspects to it. And he said to me, you know what? It really helped me understand why we won some of those candidates. Like it helped me optimize some of the pitch that I did to candidates. He said to me, we use it for campaigns here and there, but it's basically just a drafting tool. And he goes, when we draft something or tell the chatbot to go spit something back to us, it gives us probably about 15% of what we need. And then we just build on top of it. So it's a really good research tool. And to your point before, it's a really good synthesis tool.
Are you seeing examples of algorithm-driven interactions or pure generative AI changing how we, the public, experience politics?
I see it in a sense that campaigns are actually able to push out more content in a shorter period of time. So like you might see a campaign that might communicate once or twice a week at the state and local level, whereas now they could do it every day if they wanted to. So you're seeing a lot more content come from campaigns. Now, whether or not that content that you're seeing is 10% or 100% driven by the algorithm or by basically the prompts. These things are basically garbage in, garbage out. Like if you know how to go ahead and prompt an AI, it will give you really good stuff back as opposed to just, hey, give me a speech on X. Guess what? You'll get a generic speech, right? It's if you're training somebody who's first time right out of college working on a campaign, like it's at that level of professionalism at this point. You're basically getting somebody who's like a political newbie who's working on a campaign, but is a fairly decent writer, right? The best candidates are saying, hey, wait a minute, that doesn't even sound like me. Let's do some editing. So that's really what's going on. Then I have another story for you. There's a very interesting group of people who are developers primarily, who are like sort of political, but also developers. And they're looking at coming up with campaign planning through AI. You would enter a whole bunch of things about the race, the win totals, the turnout levels, the sort of themes that work. You would throw in polling and all these other things. You throw it into the algorithm, and the algorithm would spit out for you a campaign plan. Now, that is legitimately, from my estimation of the people that I talked with, this is way early for like where this is going to be. But this is where you're getting a lot of sort of the people who are really bullish on this technology are saying we're going to get to reasoning models. We're going to get to much more powerful human-like interactions with this kind of stuff. So that's where this is going. It's becoming not just an analysis tool or a generative drafts, but also a much more strategic way of running campaigns. And to me, that's the thing that I'm actually really concerned about, because
Mm.
you really remove a lot of the human element.
Look, as a former campaign manager, you just made my ears perk up. All right. See,
Yeah,
I think you've taken us to this is where I wanted to go. We can
I know.
call this
Yeah.
the wicked part of the conversation. We've got the Glinda version and we've got the Alphaba version of what AI is doing to democracy. And I want to start with the Glinda version, which I think you just laid out very well. Again, democracy is we are in charge individually as part of our society version of politics. It's our collective ability to weigh in on all of the activities associated with governing our country and moderating the debate and conflict among different points of view. The good version is what you're seeing in your book here. You're seeing we're essentially getting chatbots, generative AI serving the role of precocious interns. You've even got line of sight to it can generate strategic plans for you. This is a really critical function. As a former campaign manager, what you do is you put together a plan and a budget, specifically the budget side of it, where
Yeah.
you are trying to figure out with all of your resources, both volunteer and paid, how you get to certain vote goals and how you're going to communicate, how you're going to organize, who you're going to hire, what kinds of means of communication you're going to pay for. All of the pieces that go into helping people in a democracy to make a political decision go your way. And what you're suggesting is you could have an AI tool that can do a lot of it and might even have some insights that you might not have. You're a late 20 something, early 30 something person who's been hired to manage a congressional campaign, and you only know what you know. And AI might have insights on this is a district where mail is really going to be valuable. This is a district where you really want to knock doors in these areas because we see a return on investment on that. And you could get a strategic plan that embodies those kinds of insights that might even be better than what a human can do. Did I just sum up the Glinda version of this?
It's a yes, but I think that the Glenda argument also is that Glenda still remains in charge of all of this. Okay, that Glenda gives oversight to the AI bot. That Glenda is smart enough to understand that whatever I get out of this technology is not going to be 100%, and I need to add more value to it.
Let's go to the bad side.
Okay,
What
let's
do
go to the
these
dark side.
mean?
Yeah,
Yes, on the dark
yeah.
side,
There's a reason why the new cover is dark.
there's a recent headline that really caught my eye
Yep.
about how, under the influence of Elon Musk and Doge, the General Services Administration, which is sort of like the landlord for the federal government, they manage federal properties and that kind of thing, federal build. What they're trying to do is replace people with
Yeah.
AI, and they're going to have AI make decisions, create content for grants, and it would kind of remove your but proposition of the
Yeah.
human
Yeah.
oversight of what the machine is doing. We've already had kind of humorous outcomes from the Doge process where they used AI to do word search and screen for certain naughty words like gay in federal materials. And it's
Yeah.
they've removed the name of the plane that bombed Hiroshima because it was called the Enola Gay. And we can't have that in a historical website. That's ridiculous. But what I'm worried about is a scenario where you have machines making decisions that are optimized toward algorithms that are sort of making decisions about what the best outcomes, what the best content will be. And it becomes recycled human thought where the human piece of it is taken further and further out. And it locks us in even more as voters to we're getting presented stuff that isn't really meant to persuade us. It isn't really meant to interact with us. And where we have no ability to interact back and persuade anyone else. Everything is being mediated through these machine interlocutors who have no real human intelligence behind them.
It is a dystopian version of this. Again, like with any technology, the further away the humans are, the worse it is, right? And also the effects of what this technology could do. For example, let's say you're on Social Security, you didn't get your Social Security check. So what you do is you go on the website and you're like, okay, I want to go talk to somebody. If you're talking to a chatbot about the most personal thing that you feel is your relationship with your government, which is I paid all this money in and where's my money? And then the chatbot decides, because it's not really finely tuned, because it doesn't really care, and maybe it's tuned off of Elon's personality, and the person just says, we shouldn't have Social Security. The chatbot says back to you, we shouldn't have Social Security anyway. Right? Medicare, same situation. Let's say that your doctor hasn't been reimbursed, and now you've got to check a bill for like $20,000 because you had a colonoscopy, and you're like, damn, that was supposed to be covered. And then you go to the website or you call, and you're now being served in AI voice, because that could happen someday. We saw that being tested by OpenAI a few months ago. So why not that show up someday and replace somebody on the phone? And if someone's saying to you, God, that's really terrible, $20,000. Well, what happened? Like you get, sorry, it's been denied. Can I talk to somebody? No.
This happened to a former guest on this show, former Mideast editor for the Associated Press, Dan Perry, multiple time guest on this show,
Nice.
was essentially banned from Facebook temporarily for some violation that he could not untangle. It really was like this Kafka-esque process intermediated by chatbots.
Yeah.
And it was based on a misunderstanding. You can imagine how the things he writes very sanely, very reasonably, and with journalistic reserve about situations in the Middle East could trigger keyword searches and screening tools by AI. And long story short, you have a piece of important human thought that can help people to understand the world and make decisions in a democracy that is removed. And it represents all of his human thought, and it's being done by a machine, and all forms of recourse are moderated by machines. And this is
There's no way out.
and there's no way out. And
Right.
there's no.
You're stuck in the machine.
So, with that horrible thought in mind, where are we going with this? What is this going to look like when you write your third edition in 2026 or in 2028?
Yeah, from my perspective, when I'm looking at this, I usually look at big shifts in technology or big shifts in how professionalism and or how fast things have gone. I think that this technology, I think, is going to be refined over the next 4 years. So I don't know that in 4 years, this will be the next edition. It will probably be more integrated into the book as opposed to having its own separate chapter, because it will become part of everything, right? It will just become a piece of what we talk about. There may be a separate chapter in it anyway, because there'll be probably some changes there. But I think that, to your point, that what I'm playing with as far as the third edition is how far all of this technology goes everywhere. So how far campaigns really go everywhere. Because the one piece of this that I haven't really talked about sort of goes back to my dissertation. My dissertation was on healthcare reform first try, with Hillary Clinton's infamous effort that went down the tubes. And so my point of view was like that was really the first public affairs campaign that was focused completely on a effort by government to do a thing, right? And HIAA, which was the hospitals, put up Harry and Louise ads, which is basically a couple sitting at a table talking about, oh my God, I can't believe we're not going to have healthcare, or it's going to cost too much, and all these kinds of reasons why. It was a sort of kitchen table conversation about a very difficult thing to understand. That launched a whole industry of public affairs people who are now battling on everything that is big, small, and medium level kind of public policy debates. Okay. So all the ads that you're seeing about Doge and other things have their genesis really at that dinner table between Harry and Louise. And so my challenge, and I think that will be something very interesting, is to talk about the permanent campaign in terms of all of the rest of the campaigns that are going on, not just the electoral campaigns. And so I see that there's either a separate book or a version of this book that talks about public affairs campaigns in a way that nobody else has talked about. And I feel like that's a contribution that we can make, because I think that once this technology sort of finds its way out of the political realm, it'll find its way to the public affairs realm, and that they will be starting to use these kinds of techniques on AI. They've already been using everything else. And the fact of the matter is, there are tools now, like from Quorum, from Congress in Your Pocket, my own firm, we just launched in January a way to summarize bills in Congress. So if you tap summarize, you now get just 2 paragraphs of a 500-page bill, which tells you like sort of the highlights of what's going on. So we can distill for normies, which is a really useful tool. But I think there are a lot of tools out there that are going to be helpful in between campaigns, which will be actually very interesting to look at. And then the other thing I would have to say is, I think that the next version of this should really look more internationally. I'm teaching a class over at NYU that is essentially stood up to go ahead and talk about not only domestic campaigns, but also international campaigns. And I have some really terrific students. I have a student who's working on something in Mexico. I have another one who's working on something in Germany. And so I think that one of the challenges I have is being a US based consultant is, okay, well, what about the rest of the world? They're starting to adopt some of the practices that we've been doing over the past several years. Usually what they're doing is they're looking at, okay, well, what works in America? What can we do elsewhere? But there's also been a lot of innovation, particularly in the EU. They had just had a conference on political tech that I'll probably end up speaking at next year. I've become a friend of the person who runs it. And I think that there's sort of like these other sort of places where, like to your original point here on this podcast, this stuff doesn't just live in the electoral realm, it's living in other places, and it's also living in different countries.
And what I hear you saying is that what really makes modern political campaigns modern is that they're everywhere. Political
Yeah.
campaigns are embedded in everything that we do to persuade one another to make decisions. And all of the techniques that you've been covering in the first edition, now in the second edition, everything that you and I learned as campaign managers that we thought was really
Yeah.
applicable to, let's get this gal or this guy into office,
Mhm.
they're all pervading all kinds of other realms. And embedded in all of that is AI. And that presents
Yeah.
a major challenge that we're going to have to work through in the years to come. Michael Cohen, thank you so much for being on Beyond Politics.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.